Hi everyone, it's Ichi here and welcome back to another episode of the Tangerine Knits podcast. Today is January 22nd, which is the first day of the Lunar New Year. So happy New Year to anyone who's watching who celebrates. I got to celebrate this weekend by making dumplings with some of my friends, which is one of the main traditions of the holiday. So we all gathered together, we all wore red, it was very festive, and we made a lot of food, had a lovely meal, and then played some board games as well. So I hope you also had a chance to celebrate, and I am excited to be capping off my weekend by filming this episode. So today I have a lot of exciting things to show, I think. I've got some finished objects, some more gift knits, and also I started doing color work, so I'm super excited to share my works in progress color work edition with you. And also I decided to cast on something for the Chinese New Year that's like red, which is the lucky color. And I hope to work on that for the next 2 weeks or so, which is traditionally when the New Year is being celebrated. So with that said, let's get into our finished objects. The first finished object is the Ingrid Sweater, which I'm wearing right now. If you watch my previous episode, you might be wondering, did she frog the sleeves? Do they match now? So brief recap, at the end of the last episode, I had knit almost the entire sweater, except for I ran out of yarn just before half of the cuff was finished. I've since got more yarn from Knitting for Olive, which shipped really quickly, if I might add. I ordered it. It got here a week and a half after I ordered it, and I live in Virginia. So props to Knitting for Olive. And with the extra skein of yarn, I was able to finish the cuff. So that's one thing that's different. The other thing was the sleeves. So during the last episode, I mentioned that I had essentially not knit as many short rows as I should have on one of the sleeves because the first setup row for the short row was too long for me. I made it too long, basically. And thank you to everyone who chimed in the comments about whether I should frog it, whether I should leave it. And the current state is that I have not yet fixed it. As you can see, the sleeve on this side, it's a little bit longer than on this side. I do think that I would like to do it at some point, but I'm not going to pressure myself to do it really soon. And I'm just going to wear the sweater until the day that I decide to fix it. And the reason I came to that conclusion was because honestly, even when I was editing my last episode, I saw that I was pretty negative about this sweater, and it really was reflective of the way that I had built up so much expectation around the sweater. I just had this dream that I would be able to have this gorgeous Christmas sweater that I could wear, and it didn't work out at the time, and I just got, really down on it. And during that video, I was just fresh off the wave of disappointment. But after getting some space from that, I just reflected a little bit on how I view knitting mistakes. And usually I'm not one to shy away from redoing my knitting to not just fix mistakes, but also to make even like what some might consider minor improvements. If you've seen my previous episodes, you may have seen that I talk about redoing something in like so many of the projects that I made. One example is during my step-by-step sweater, I was using self-striping yarn, and I had like ripped out one sleeve because I wanted the striping pattern to match. And during the Sunday sweater, I ripped out the whole yoke because I wanted the ribbing to look a little bit neater. And during those projects, it really didn't bother me that I was redoing the work. I just viewed the redoing as part of my process, as part of my journey for that project, and also as an opportunity to learn something new, like how to make neater ribbing and considerations when using self-striping yarn. And it's actually really ironic that I was so resistant to fixing my Ingrid sweater because literally like right before that, I had knit a vanilla sock and I made a mistake for the gusset, and I cut and grafted the gusset section, as in I, weaved in lifelines, cut the sock in half, ripped out the gusset section, re-knit it, and then grafted it back together for a vanilla sock so that I can learn the cutting and grafting technique and be ready to do it if I needed to for a bigger project like a sweater. And it just seemed like this would have been, the opportunity to use that. But I was still like really resistant to it because I didn't view it as an opportunity to use a skill that I've learned. I viewed it just as an obstacle to achieving my dream sweater. So that was really the source of my, negativity and disappointment. And honestly, fixating on not achieving the perfect dream sweater prevented me from being able to appreciate all the things that went right with the sweater, including the fact that I knit it in the first place. As I mentioned, this was a pattern that I have been eyeing ever since I started to learn to knit, and it was kind of an out of reach difficulty for a while until I finally decided to give it a go, and was really happy to find that it was a really fun knit, that it was engaging, it was an interesting construction, and the fact that I was able to build the skills that allowed me to do it. And yes, I did make a mistake, but it's a mistake that I'm capable of fixing. So all in all, I'd say this was just a reminder for me to enjoy the journey of knitting and not just fixate on the final product. At the end of the day, I'm not knitting because I really need another sweater to wear. I knit because I like to do it. So I will share that reminder in case it's something that you need to hear as well. And to sum it up, currently my sleeves do not match. Some people might notice, some people might not. I do notice it, but I'm not going to choose to let it bother me because I know I can fix it. But at the same time, I'm not going to pressure myself to fix it. I will give myself the opportunity to work on other projects that are giving me joy right now and just put it on my backlog to get to this one day, because I would like to make the sleeves match. And once again, thank you to those who chimed in the comments. I think one of you mentioned that you think the cutting and grafting would look fine for the sweater because there's so many texture sections, and I think you're right. So yeah, I do want to try that at some point. And I think that will be the last I talk about this Ingrid sweater for a while. I think I've shown this a little bit in like every podcast episode so far. It's been a journey, and I'm going to, accept that it's imperfect, but still allow myself to enjoy it anyway. So yeah, that's it for this one. All right, on to another final project. So this one is the final piece in my little winter accessories set. So this is the scarf number 3 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. Yeah, it's basically the same shape and concept as a Sophie scarf. I had originally purchased the Sophie scarf pattern and thinking I'd make that as the scarf in my little set, but I also then saw the scarf number 3 and really was intrigued by the ribbing pattern, so I decided to do that. And it was a pretty fun knit. I'll put it on even though it definitely doesn't match my current outfit right now. But yes, it would be something that you can wear like this. And the other items in my set I shared previously is my cabled headband, which I showed in my last video, and then my Better Together mittens. So all together, this is my little winter accessories set. I haven't worn them all together yet because honestly it's been pretty warm. But this is knit in the Cascade 220 Superwash Sport, which is a Superwash Merino yarn. I really like this pattern. It is, again, I think it's really similar to the Sophie scarf in construction, except for instead of garter, it's this ribbing detail. And the edging is also different. It's not an I-cord edging, but it looks quite nice. And I knit it basically exactly to pattern for the larger size. It was pretty quick to knit. I think when the section down here is so skinny that it feels like you're making progress really, really quickly, and then you slow down a little bit as the scarf gets wider, but then it feels like you speed up again when you start decreasing. So yeah, I really enjoy it. I think this little scarf is pretty practical because I can just stick it in my purse. Again, similarly to what I said about the cable headband, when it's not that cold, I don't really have to wear a giant scarf. I can just bring something small and break it out when I feel like I need it. So that was really nice, and I'm glad to have completed my little set. The next finished object I'll just mention because I don't have it. It was a gift to my friend Katie. It is a actual Sophie scarf. I knit it using the Cascade 220 Superwash Merino in the color Cherry. It's the same yarn that I used for my boyfriend's Oslo Hat, and I gave it to her when she came and visited last weekend as a belated Christmas present, and I think she really liked it. It's really comfortable, and I think the red really pops with her winter coat, which is black, and I think the red looked really good on her as well, so I'm really glad to have knit that. In terms of the Sophie scarf pattern, I'll say that the process wasn't as mindless as I thought it would be because there is a lot of counting rows, but it's still very cozy, so I'm glad I got to give her that scarf. Moving right along, I have another item that I made as a gift, and this is the Broken Record socks. I knit this using, again, Cascade Heritage in the color Mossy Rock, and the contrast yarn is Hikoo Cobasi in the color Natural. It's a cotton, bamboo, silk, and nylon blend. I basically used it because I had it in stash and I needed a contrast yarn, so yeah. The pattern here is Broken Rib. I mentioned in my last episode that the Broken Rib, I made it less dense than the pattern called for by accident, but the stitch counts worked out, so I just went with it. The Broken Rib stitch should be happening like every 3 stitches as part of a 3-stitch repeat, as opposed to a 6-stitch repeat, which is what I did. But I think the wide ribbing actually looks pretty nice. It's a heel flap and gusset construction for the heel. I used the Summerly Designs pattern for the heel, actually, just because I was already familiar with it. The one thing that I'll share about making this sock is that because I was making it for my boyfriend, I wasn't able to just, well, I guess I could, but I didn't want to be annoying to always be like, keep trying on this sock to make sure I'm knitting it to the right length. So I follow the Fish Lips Kiss sock pattern. The Fish Lips, I can never say this right. The Fish Lips Kiss heel pattern for the measurement instructions. So like, obviously I didn't do the Fish Lips Kiss heel, but I did follow the instructions to make a cardboard foot and then make some measurements and draw some lines so I can easily tell when to start knitting for the toe and also to try it on to make sure that it fits. So I think that was really helpful even if you don't use the Fish Lips Kiss heel method, especially I think if you were doing a toe-up sock. I've yet to try a toe-up sock, even though I'd like to. I've heard of people say that for a toe-up sock, it can be really difficult to know when to start making the heel. So I think this will be really nice. So yeah, this was really helpful. Although I do acknowledge that it may make me appear a little bit psycho to have a cardboard cutout of my boyfriend's foot. But, it resulted in a sock that fits him, so who can really complain? Yeah, he has seen this. I just blocked it and dried it, so he hasn't worn it yet. He did try them on before blocking, and they are a perfect fit, so I'm really, really pleased about it, and I know he's really excited to get to wear it. So yeah, I'm very happy about this. So the last finished object, I'll have to insert a video because I've already gifted it. It's another part of my gift to my friend Katie, and it is a crocheted Tanjiro. This is a character from Demon Slayer, which is an anime. And it is just an incredible pattern. The detail on Tanjiro is really amazing. I especially found that the hair is really impressive. So as you can see, his head is quite big. I think that contributes to how cute the pattern is. And because of that, the hair takes up a lot of the surface area. And in a lot of patterns that I've seen, the hair is kind of just the wig cap. But here you can see that the whole head is covered with hair strands and they're arranged in really cool layers, so it looks like an actual hairdo. So I think that's really impressive. He's also got his earrings. There's some embroidery details on his body as well. You basically crochet all the different parts, make all the embroidery, and then assemble it. So assembly itself actually takes quite a while. There's quite a bit of seaming. I did use hot glue when possible, when I thought that it would be sturdy enough, but for the parts that are, connecting like the arms or the head, I usually stitch them together for sturdiness. The story behind this is actually, this is not my first time making Tanjiro. I originally made Tanjiro and Nezuko for my friend Katie for her birthday, which was many months ago. But the tragic thing is I had sent those off in the mail via USPS, was anxiously tracking it because I was so excited for her to receive them, and they got lost in the mail. I was so disappointed. I filed a claim. I hoped that they would find it. I made many calls, but ultimately it was just lost. And it always sucks to lose something in the mail, but this wasn't something that I could just reorder. And so I decided that I'd like to remake it for her, maybe for Christmas. And so this was indeed like a long-term whip and long-term FO, and I didn't want to show it because I didn't want the surprise to be spoiled. But yes, I'm really happy that this new Tanjiro has a home. And honestly, the first Tanjiro was one of the first amigurumi that I've ever made. So I'd say arguably this one looks even better. So ultimately, it worked out. I'm happy that my friend Katie has a Tanjiro. All right, that's all the finished objects. So now for whips. And I will start with my very exciting COLORWORK whips. Okay, so the first COLORWORK whip is the Lumme Sweater by Sari Nordland. I looked up how to pronounce the word lume in Finnish on Google Translate, so I'm hoping I'm getting it somewhat close. I believe it means water lilies, which is what this motif is inspired by. and it is absolutely gorgeous. I first saw this pattern on the knitting podcast by Carson. It's called Carsley Handmade. She had a video showing all the sweaters she'd ever made, and there were some gems in there. One of them was a Lumme sweater using this color palette, and I absolutely adored it. At the time, I didn't know how to do color work, so I just kind of bookmarked it in my brain and thinking that I'd make it one day. The yarn that I use for this is Juniper Moon Farms Patagonia Merino in the colors Rust and Ivory. The sweater pattern calls for a worsted weight yarn, specifically Cascade 220, but I already had the Patagonia Merino in stash. I mentioned earlier in my first episode that I had bought a sweater quantity of this yarn, but I hadn't committed it to a project just yet. And although at first I was a little bit hesitant for my first colorwork sweater to be using a DK weight yarn, which is more knitting, would take longer, I decided that, I already had the yarn. A lot of you said in your comments for my previous episode that you really love this yarn. And I thought, well, I already have this yarn and I really want to make this sweater in this specific color, so might as well use it instead of buying more yarn. And I will say I'm happy with my choice so far. It hasn't felt overwhelming. The color work has actually been really enjoyable for me. And I think the DK weight color work would be less thick than a worsted weight color work. So I think that would be pretty nice. I live in Virginia and the climate really hasn't been that cold. So maybe a DK weight colorwork sweater would be a little bit more wearable for me anyway. So I'm happy with that choice. I did stick with the same needle sizes though that the pattern called for. So for the single stranded stockinette section, I'm using a 4.5 millimeter needle. And then the colorwork yoke, I've been using a 5 millimeter needle. So looking through Ravelry, I think these needle sizes are a bit bigger than what other people use for the same yarn knitting colorwork sweaters, but I think it's been looking fine so far. I know it probably has room to be a little bit denser, but hopefully it would be okay. And I know everybody's tension is different too, so you can't always just use the same needle size somebody else uses. So I had swatched with the 4.5 millimeters for the stockinette and thought that the fabric looked fine to me, so I decided to just go with that. So in the end, I should say that I sized up 2 sizes than what the pattern recommended based on bust circumference and ease. So the reason I did that, one was because my gauge was obviously smaller because I used a thinner yarn, but also I wanted a little bit more ease than the pattern called for because I like more oversized sweaters. So that's why I sized up 2 sizes. I have been told that this yarn grows quite a bit. So when I bought it from my local yarn store, the lady was mentioning that she had knit a colorwork sweater using the same yarn and the sleeve grew like several inches. So what I think I'm going to do is when I get to the sleeves, I'll just literally like block it and try it on for size after blocking before I decide how much longer to knit it, if at all, before getting to the ribbing. I think that's probably the safest. Yeah, let me know if you have any similar experiences using this yarn. So as I mentioned, this is my first colorwork project, and so it did take some trial and error. I'll just share that. Originally, I thought I would make like a colorwork hat or something to practice, and I did start to do that. I found a free pattern on Ravelry thinking I'd make a colorwork hat, but then I realized like to make a whole hat, you have to first knit the brim, which is just ribbing, and I didn't really want to do that because I didn't really need the hat. I just wanted to practice colorwork. So I used the chart that I found in the hat pattern to get some experiences knitting charts, but I think if you're getting started, you could really just knit like, alternating colors 1 stitch at a time, or 2 stitches in the main color, 2 stitches in the contrast. I did at first try to do 2-handed color work because I thought that it seemed really efficient. I struggled with that because I don't know how to knit English style. So I'm a continental knitter and that's really intuitive for me, but I just didn't know what to do when I was holding the yarn in my right hand. And so in fact, I decided that maybe I'll just try to practice knitting English style for a little bit to see how that goes. And honestly, that felt like I was learning how to knit for the first time all over again. It's so funny how different it is that even though I know like how to knit in theory because I can using my left hand to hold the yarn, when I was using my other hand, like there was just no muscle memory. My hands are super awkward and I couldn't get right tension. So I think that's probably a pretty normal experience when you're learning a different style of knitting. So, because I wasn't doing the English style very well and because I was really slow at it, I figured I would then just try the pick up and drop. So you knit with one strand, and when you need to switch to the other strand, just drop the yarn and pick up the other one. I did that for a while. Then I learned that you can actually hold both yarns in one hand for tensioning the yarn. And at first I thought it looked like it was just way too much coordination. And in the beginning it really was. But after some practice, by just doing the project, I started to really get the hang of it. And now, after having finished the yoke, during the last couple of rows, I felt like it was actually a pretty fluid motion. I feel like it really doesn't slow me down very much from just knitting one strand, actually. Yes, that's something that ended up working really well for me. And using that technique, I find that knitting color work isn't as overwhelming or time consuming as I thought it would be. So it's something that I've really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to doing more color work in the future. So the second color work project that I've started is the Ovis sock. I'm knitting this using the Filcolana Arwetta Classic that I have in this project bag, and the colors are Dijon, and I think this one didn't have a color. It's just color 977. It's one of the cream, or I guess it's one of the natural looking colors. And I started this maybe when I was like a couple rows into the Lumme Sweater. I wasn't super far into that just yet. And this one is different because the sheep section is 3-stranded color work. So there's 3 colors in every row, the Dijon color, the white, and the black. And for me, that was definitely a whole new learning experience. So first I'll start with the sizing for the sock. Usually for not usually, I've knit one pair of socks for myself. So for my vanilla sock, I used a 64 stitch sock, and that fit me perfectly. I know that color work is tighter, so people usually have to increase stitch count or increase needle size. And so at first I tried to increase needle size. So instead of using a 2.25 millimeter needle, I used a 2.5 millimeter needle to knit the color work. And at first, when I knitted a couple rows of the sheep, I tried the cuff on, and I just could not pull it over my heel. So it wasn't enough to just size up one needle size. So I ripped it back, and then I tried to size up to 2.75 millimeter needles for the 3-color work. At that point, I also tried to knit the sock inside out, because I heard that if the floats are going along the along the outer circumference, then there's more room than if it was around the inner circumference, which is smaller. So I tried that. I also read that catching floats can cause your work to be a little bit tighter, so I tried not catching floats. But after that attempt, the heel was still too tight, and I didn't like that I didn't catch floats, because sometimes they were, in the sections where there were 6 or so stitches, they just seemed really long, and I knew that I wouldn't enjoy the experience of having my toes caught in the floats. So I frogged it back again and decided that, okay, I think I just need to increase the stitch count. So this time I ripped out the whole sock, and I knit the cuff using a 72 stitch, and I knitted 72 stitches for the cuff using 2.25 millimeter needles. I figured if I sized up too much, it would just be, too big at the cuff. And then for the little bit between the cuff and the color work, I sized up to 2.5 millimeter needles, I guess as a transition. And then for the sheep 3-color color work, I used 2.75 millimeter needles. And this time I tried it on, and it fits, so I was very glad. And then I went back down to 2.5 millimeter needles for the 2-color color work, which is going to be the rest of the sock. And so far when I try it on, it fits great. This yarn is really nice. I've never used Filcolana Arwetta before. I know it's a really popular sock yarn, and I feel like even though it's also superwash, it feels less synthetic than the Cascade Heritage. The Cascade Heritage is very smooth, and I feel like the feel is more nylon forward. This one feels like more wool forward, if that makes sense. I will say that the 3-color color work section, I thought it was quite a bit more challenging than having only 2 strands. There's just a lot more yarn management. Yarn gets twisted more easily. It's a little bit trickier to catch float and keeping track of the color dominance order of 3 different strands. In this case, there was only such a short section that was 3-color color work, so it was totally manageable. But it did make me realize, if I were to knit a 3-color sweater, that would definitely be quite a journey. Then again, by the time I was trying to knit this 3-stranded color work section, I was still quite new to color work. I am still quite new, but having knitted the whole yoke of the Lumme Sweater, I feel like I have a better handle on it. So maybe when I knit the second sock, I can keep you posted on how I feel about the 3-color color work and whether it's more manageable now that I just have generally more experience with color work, that I generally have more practice with color work, I should say. So I have stopped right before putting in the waste yarn for the afterthought heel. and I have been kind of trying to learn about how to adapt the fit of an afterthought heel to make sure it fits my foot. Roxanne Richardson has a video on that, and basically when I calculated the heel diagonal based on the width of my sock and then the rate of decreases, etc. for a classic afterthought heel, and compare that to my heel diagonal as measured on my foot, I found that I think I would need more room than what the pattern would allow. So I think one of the techniques, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but one of the techniques is to increase a couple of stitches in the first round of the heel. So I think I might do that, but I might just do a little bit more calculation on how many stitches I need to increase by, but I'll keep you all posted on that. And I'm looking forward to trying out the afterthought heel method. Although technically, I think per that Roxanne Richardson video, if you put a waist yarn in, it's colloquially known as an afterthought heel, but is that technically a forethought heel? I don't know. I'm really excited to have the Ovis socks, partly because, I had my previous vanilla socks that I was loving to death. I brought them with me on my trip to New York to visit my family, and I left them there by accident. So my mom did offer to mail it to me, but I figured, it's not really worth it. Maybe the Tanjiro and Nezuko being lost in the mail incident is still too fresh on my mind, but I just figured I can knit another sock for myself. I'm already working on a pair, so I'm very excited to have another pair of hand-knitted, cozy socks to wear at home. All right, the next whip is my Chinese New Year cast on. I wanted to have something red to work on during the holidays because I thought that would be really fun and festive. And so this is hardly a start. I cast it on yesterday after I came back from dinner, so it was already pretty late. But this is the beginnings of a Laulu shawl by Sari Nordland. I did not look up how to pronounce that word, so I may be saying it totally wrong. But I believe it's something to do with the rhythm of a song or something like that. And as you can see, I haven't gotten very far, but it's been really fun so far. It hasn't been too difficult so far, but again, I feel like I can't quite comment on it just yet. But it's been promising, and I'm really excited to work on this. I know that I'm not going to have enough yarn to make the full size, so I am knitting this using the Shibui Knits Haven in the color Paprika. This is one of my yarn store sales section acquisitions. This was half off in the back shelf at my local yarn store. It is a cashmere and merino blend. It's mostly merino with like maybe 20% cashmere, but it's super, super soft, and I think it would be really nice as a accent for winter. So I'll be continuing to work on this. The Chinese New Year celebrations technically go for, I think, like 15 days or something like that. I'm not going to pressure myself to finish it over 2 weeks, but I do feel like I'll be very excited to work on it. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on this. And the very last thing that I have to share is mostly something I started because I wanted just to stockinette in the round, you don't have to think about it type of project. And it is the beginnings of another Oslo hat. And this is knit also using Shibui Knits Haven. And this is the color Caper. So I showed this in my previous acquisition when I also got the other color of the Shibui Knits Haven. And at that time I had gotten 2 skeins thinking I don't know what I was going to make with it, like mittens or something. But I kind of changed my mind. I thought that it'd be nice to have an Oslo hat, so I picked up another skein. I think there was like one last hank of yarn in there that was this Caper color. I didn't even check if they're the same dye lot, so I hope they're not too far off. But yeah, nobody had gotten that last skein, so I figured I would need 3 for a full triple folded brim Oslo hat, so I picked it up. I started knitting it, like almost like as a fidget toy, like you can just really knit without thinking because it's just stockinette in the round for quite a while. The pattern, I think, so it's a triple folded brim, and the pattern technically has you, I don't think I'm at the right length yet anyway, but has you kind of fold down to the cast on edge and then knit these together before continuing on for the rest of the hat. I find that like knitting together with a cast on edge is just a little bit not my favorite thing to do. So for the other Oslo hat that I made, I just like sewed it together at the end and I thought it worked just fine. So I think I'm just going to knit like the super long tube and then like sew it together at the end. So I've got even more real estate to cover as a mindless tube before I get to the shaping. I'm not really sure how I feel about this color on me. So we shall see. The fabric feels really comfortable though, so I'm sure that I would enjoy it. All right, so that's it for my projects. And for the acquisition portion, I will admit that I bought a lot of yarn because I was really excited to plan what I'm going to make next. But I'm not sure how interesting it would be for you to watch me just like show off a bunch of skeins of yarns. So I'll show you two like notions acquisitions that I thought was interesting. Well, actually one is an anti-acquisition, a loss, if you will. So what happened was I was vacuuming the area around my couch. It's where I usually sit and knit. And at one point I just heard a weird clanking in my vacuum and I thought, okay, maybe a stitch marker got caught or something. Let me just fix it. And I opened the little roller section of the vacuum and I find this. Look how gnarly this is. This used to be my 2.25 millimeter needles for knitting socks. And I think this must have fallen on the ground and I didn't see it when I was vacuuming. And the vacuum straight up like sucked up this whole needle and I guess pulled this one off the cable. Like you can see the frayed cable. I don't know if you can see it, but the cable is all frayed. And on this side, like this needle was literally wrapped up in a coil around the little roller part of my vacuum. And I bent it back thinking like, oh, I wonder if it's salvageable. And after seeing this side, I figured it's definitely not. So this made me realize like my vacuum is really powerful and I wouldn't want to get on its bad side. So I thought this was pretty crazy that this happened. First I was like, is my vacuum okay? But the vacuum seems fine. This needle is obviously not. So I did just buy another one. I didn't really see what other choice I had. So I just bought a new one of these so I can keep knitting socks. Another sock related acquisition is that I've been really intrigued by the 9-inch circulars. So I've been knitting socks using Magic Loop pretty exclusively and that's working just fine for me. But you know, it's always nice when you can just knit in the round, not have to think about adjusting your cables. So I got this one. It's a 2.25 millimeter 9-inch circular. I will say I tried knitting with it once and had a very difficult time. I just haven't quite gotten the hang of it. I think I am interested in practicing with this a little bit more because I think it could be really useful. I have heard that it's maybe a little bit difficult for knitting patterns, but for vanilla socks, I'm hoping this could be helpful. So we'll see. More to come on this. Oh, the other reason I got them was because I had considered getting like other sizes for knitting sleeves, but I figured I'd try, you know, at least one of them just to see if I even enjoy the process before committing to a whole set or committing to more needles. And so far, I'm not quite convinced, but I know it just takes more practice. So I gave up on it for now, but I'm hoping that one day I'll have the motivation to try with it again. But if you have 9-inch circulars, let me know how you feel about them. Okay, once again, I've been talking for quite a while, so I will wrap up the video for today. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Happy Lunar New Year if you celebrate, and otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you soon in the next episode. Bye, everyone!